welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here, we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Hollis, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Rachel.
So, first question, what is something you wish people knew about you that you don't think many do?
Oh, wow. What is something I wish people knew about me? So I often want to talk about this, but I don't always know how to talk about it because it can be a little bit heavy and it can be a little bit dense. But my childhood was very tumultuous, and there were some very intense things that happened when I was a teenager that inform a lot of how I've arrived at my work now. And so I think about it a lot, but I also think about how the reason I don't share that time in my life so much is because I also think in my head about how many people experience so much tumult in their home lives in general. And so I want to leave room for other people's experiences, for their childhood, for their upbringing, for their adolescence. And I don't always like to bring it up because also I'm a 36-year-old woman, and it feels like even though it's informing and it's the foundation of so much of who I am, it's not the most relevant education that I want to reference all the time. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense, of course. So where does your desire to share about it come from? Is there any part that you would want to share now?
I think the desire to share it is because there is a part of me, like with anything that we share with other people, it's because one, there's a part of us that wants to be seen and acknowledged, right? But then two, there's a relatability aspect. And there is always a part of me that wants to say in some way, if you are going through a really a really intense moment in your life, I see you because I've been there. And so I think those are the two impulses to want to share. I think there just hasn't been a way for me to understand how to share it, to share these experiences in a way that feels productive, I guess, for me. So, and I would be happy to talk about them, but also there were a series of things that happened, and I feel like I can't even speak to just one specific thing because it was really just like until I left, well, really until my 20s that I really felt like I started getting a handle on everything. So it had to do with friendships, it had to do with family, it had to do with my own life choices. But I guess I just would like to share that it was a rocky foundation. I feel like a lot of times I come off in all of my work as like I have this very packaged life. I come across like I really love to make things look beautiful. I really love to make beautiful things, but I don't want to ever pretend like one, that my life is perfectly beautiful now or that it's always been that way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. I mean, for me personally, when things come up that I want to share and I don't really know how to share them, I find that platforms like Substack or the podcast sometimes even is a helpful place for that because I'm not trying to, I know that people who are reading it are more invested and maybe more interested. And also,
Hmm.
I'm just giving myself free range for it to be whatever it needs to be, and not fit into a certain category or box. And I hear you on the fact that it was a whole string of events, but when you look back, is there one lesson or key reflection that comes up for you right now that feels really impactful for you in your life now? Like feels like a core foundation still of your life?
Yes, absolutely. I think the thing that I carry with me all the time that is very, very rooted in my work and my value system is that you really have no idea what anyone is going through. And it doesn't matter how you might interpret a situation for yourself. Another person, even if it's somebody within your own family, let's say I don't have direct siblings, but if I did, I would imagine, we would be very different people. You could have the same exact experience of something and the other person will interpret it completely differently than you will. And so it's very important from my perspective to hold space for everyone's unique emotional, mental, energetic experiences of different situations and to respect what they say is their experience, even if you have an entirely different perception of that experience.
100%. That is something that I feel very strongly about as well. And I think one from my own experience, having gone through tumultuous times and people not being aware of that. And two, watching other people go through that and being able to have the awareness that I have no idea what they're going through. Even if we try to imagine walking in other people's shoes, so to speak, we simply can't. We don't know anything that's going on in their body, in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be able to know that everyone is seeing life through their unique, very specific to them glasses. And
Yes.
that just is what it is. And so we have to be really careful not to discount someone else's experiences just because it doesn't match or make sense in comparison to our own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And that's why I love asking people a lot of questions about their experiences as well. I think that's one of my favorite things about being a coach is like, I don't necessarily feel like I'm doing a lot of work in terms of guiding people. I feel like so much of the work is helping people uncover the truth for themselves by just asking them what their experience was, where they felt it in their body, how they're interpreting it, where that interpretation comes from, just following the threads so that they can make sense of their experience more concretely instead of it just being like, I'm feeling all these different things, or this is what actually happened, and not noticing the reactions to it, etc. I love helping people get more clear about the specificity of their experience because, again, same thing. If somebody relays an event or a series of events to me, I might see it one way, but they might have an entirely different way of perceiving it. And I love to know how the details of that perception for people.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. I think the best coaches, therapists, mentors, guides, even friends and family are the ones who help us connect more deeply to ourselves and know
Mm-hmm.
ourselves better, not the ones
Mm-hmm.
who are giving us what they think is the right guidance or support. And that can be very tricky to navigate, especially with friends and family.
Absolutely. The advice that isn't always asked for, which is a fine line also when you're a space holder. I think a lot of people think of coaches and teachers or mentors as the people that dole out advice. I think that that is a false perception. I think that there are some people that do that, but it definitely is a fine line. And you're right, especially with friends and family. It can be interesting when when that comes up.
Yeah, this is something I've been reflecting on a lot about the more I connect with others, the more I want to listen and really practice active listening. And I was
Hmm.
even, my mom's a therapist, and I was talking about this with her. And this has been one of her intentions for the year was to be a better listener. And I think that that is one of the most important ways we can show up for others.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. I mean, active listening is still very much being a participant, right? I mean, I think about it's funny because I feel like I've had a lot of people in my life that because I'm naturally a space holder, I've had a lot of people just come into my life who take up a lot of space. And I've had to figure out my own relationship to those types of people because I'm not the type of person that just like voluntarily offers so much of myself forward. But at the same time, I've never felt like I have not been present in those relationships, even if I'm not actively sharing myself by listening and taking in what these other people are sharing, I feel like I'm absorbing, I'm interpreting, I'm making sense, and then in a lot of ways I'm reflecting back to them their own experience, and it's so active. I think people sometimes think of listening as like this passive thing, but I mean, I guess the term active listening makes it sound active. Like it is a very active experience, and it's very much a reciprocal experience. I personally think that it's one of the most loving things that we can do for one another is to be able to allow one another to completely, or allow someone else to completely let themselves bring whatever is inside them out to be seen or to be heard and to be held and to be really heard and not just casually like, oh yeah, I hear you.
Because then we're listening to respond. We're listening and being aware of what the person actually needs from us, not just jumping
Hmm.
in and again coming at them with our projections or our assumptions or our perspective, and really
Hmm.
being aware of who this person is, what they're saying to us, and what they need from us. And so it's
Yes.
being responsive versus reactive.
Yes. Yeah, 100%.
Since we're talking about coaching and a little bit about your work, I would really love to know your path. What led you to what you do now? Where did you start? Anything in that realm that you want to share?
Yeah, sure. So I started out as a graphic designer. When I was a child. My no, my mom owns a graphic design studio, and so I grew up in her office, and was playing around in Photoshop and Quark at the time when I was like 7, 8 years old. And so then when I decided to go to school for college, I decided that I wanted to study graphic design because it was the thing that came the most readily for me. And so I moved to New York. I went to SVA. And while I was at SVA, graphic design, it was like second nature to me. And it was very fun. And again, I love that I loved then and I still love now because I'm still a designer now. I love being able to exercise my visual creativity skills on a regular basis. But at the time in college, I kept feeling like there was something more that I wanted to be doing. I wanted to make more of an imprint on people's lives somehow. I wanted to help more in some really tangible way. And I found yoga when I was 20. Yeah, I was junior year of college, and I was a really reckless college student. I was partying like 4 nights a week, hanging out with really, really kind of like destructive people. And yoga just like flipped this switch in my head and in my body where I started to feel like I was actually taking care of myself and I was starting to see my choices and my reactions differently. And I had this moment where I really just kind of pivoted in this new direction and I started going to yoga classes regularly, and then I eventually decided to do my yoga teacher training because I felt like there was something here in terms of this work that could be the solution or could be the pathway that I wanted to follow in terms of actually helping people the way that I wanted to help them in some sort of, somatic, personal but not too personal format. And so after a few years of teaching, I was approached by a kind of loose friend at the time, kind of like an acquaintance, to open a yoga studio with her. And that was in 2017. We opened in 2018. And running the yoga studio was the most, it was like a dream come true. It was the most incredible experience of my life, being able to bring in all these different teachers and give them a vehicle and a platform to be able to utilize their skills and their talents and create offerings that they felt empowered to offer. And it was amazing to bring in students who were new to yoga or had never done yoga or had been doing yoga for years and to offer them a community space where they could learn and explore themselves in community. Everything about it was just perfect. And then the pandemic came around, and also my business partnership was very much on the rocks. And so I left the studio and then the studio closed. And I was like, how do I still do that? How do I still get to be that person that gets to help people find what it is that they love, that lights them up so much, and then empower them to do that? And that's where coaching came into play. That was 2020. I think I formally started coaching in 2022. And that's really how I kind of landed here. I think my work is, it brings all of that into play. It brings the design strategy and the design thinking and the desire to make things really beautiful and inspiring. That is very much a part of the work that I do, and helping people be able to curate their lives for themselves. But then also everything that I learned from yoga and from managing a business and managing people has also been, it's brought into the work that I do in terms of people's somatic experience, people's interpersonal experiences. And yeah, I guess that's my long story of how I landed where I am.
Mm, I love that story. There's so much that you're saying that's reflected in your human design. I won't go into it all right now, but I'm like, oh my God, especially your strongest sense in human design is outer vision. And that's all about
Hmm.
making things beautiful. And especially when you're in an aligned place and doing work that is aligned for you, it's natural for you to make things beautiful, to want to help other people make their lives beautiful. So it's exciting to hear you talk about how important that is for you and how fulfilling that feels for you.
Yeah, it's funny because it's taken me a long time to actually come around to recognizing the importance of beauty in the world. I think, especially in those early college years when I was studying design, I just felt like it was so frivolous. Like, I felt like, especially because it was so tied to advertising in the way that I studied it at SVA, and I just felt like advertising is just consumer culture. I don't want to really be a part of that. But as I've gotten a little bit older, I've recognized that people are really attracted to the things that they believe are beautiful. And that is a way to not only bring inspiration to people, but to also educate people, to bring information to people, and to also to generally just feel better in their own lived experience. I think about the schools that are designed in a way that makes sense for people to be able to learn and be within, that people actually enjoy going to because there's more light or there's more open spaces, or the way that the school is structured, it's more communally focused, or it's set up for more conversation, like the way that the desks are arranged or the way that the rooms are arranged. And I think about that versus high schools that were built in the 70s that have no light and that have hard desks, and all these different ways that you can compare a beautiful environment to perhaps a more institutionalized kind of environment, and the difference of people's experiences in those spaces and how much beauty and design come into play in making those experiences for people. And I've really come to recognize that it's much more valuable than I used to think it was.
Yeah, well, especially from what I'm hearing you say, when you design something, you're doing it with intention. When you're making it really beautiful, it's because there's intention and a certain desire, there's care into what you're doing. And that energy is in the design. Something can be beautiful just for beauty's sake, of course, and that's valuable in and of itself. But often things are designed beautifully because there's purpose behind it. So
Absolutely.
the impact ripples out.
Yeah. And even things that you wouldn't necessarily, at least from my vantage point, that you wouldn't necessarily look at and say that's beautiful, if there is a purpose and a meaning behind it, if somebody curated it a certain way, it ends up becoming more beautiful the more that you learn about that intention.
Hmm.
So you can come at it kind of from both perspectives.
Exactly. And so where did astrology come into all of this?
Astrology is always like the third wheel, even though it informs so much of what I do. Astrology was like, again, it was always kind of there, like kind of similar to design, because my mom and I would read horoscopes all the time when I was a little
Mm.
kid, and I always loved it. I think that I started relying on it more when I was in my early 20s, when I was in college, because again, just trying to make sense of my life that didn't make sense at the time. And I also I met a woman who I consider like one of my closest friends now, and she was also super into astrology, so we would just talk about it all the time. But I think especially for people who come from tumultuous backgrounds where you don't necessarily feel like you have a lot of control. These systems of being able to project meaning or to project understanding onto situations or experiences that feel potentially volatile or feel confusing, it can almost be like a safety mechanism. So, as somebody who has always tried to make sense of the unsensible stuff, I mean, I think that's also where empathy also comes from as well, is like trying to put yourself in the perspective of somebody else's experience. I think that that's really where astrology was born from for me. And then I just became really serious about it when I went through my Saturn return, because my Saturn return was very intense. I was in that business partnership with my business partner for the yoga studio, and I was in a romantic relationship, and both were really emotionally manipulative. And at the same time, I had an ex-boyfriend who was also actually threatening me, and we had this really difficult dynamic with our shared dog as well. So there were a lot of things going on in that scenario, and I was again trying to just make sense of like, what is this timeline? Why am I in this? What is going on? And when am I going to get out of this? And what are the lessons that I'm supposed to learn from this? And then really as soon as I kind of got out of, I not got out of, but made my way through all of those difficult relationship dynamics and kind of got through to the other side, that's when I really started getting into studying astrology really deeply and started reading charts more effectively. And then I'm not going to lie, there was one particular moment where I was on a flight. I don't know where I was, but I was looking at some of my friends' charts, and information just started clicking for me in ways that it hadn't before, where it was like everything that I had learned, all the information that I had absorbed felt like it was starting to find its home. And it was really from that point on that I was like, I am now officially hooked. I want to absorb as much information as possible because I'm starting to really feel like I'm fitting the right keys into the right doors. And it's just really interesting. And it's like, it's endless in terms of what you can study. So it's a rabbit hole I just find myself going down all the time.
Mm. Yeah, it feels so good to find those things that just feel like they're meant for us, that just feel
hmm
like welcome home or knowing, you know?
hmm
I have had a similar experience in the sense that I have loved using astrology and human design and other modalities like that to have a sense of understanding about myself in the world. And it definitely is connected to my desire to have control and certainty and to make it all make sense. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes I just have to catch myself and be like, do I really need to listen to another astrology podcast telling me about the same thing I listened to yesterday?
Yeah, yes,
And so just being
100%.
on myself about that because that's just who I am and how I am. And one thing I really have loved about astrology and human design in terms of relationships is it is a tool I can look at and be like, oh, wow, I see, especially with human design because it's a lot about energy, but it's like I can really see how we are so different. And you are just
hmm
not feeling the world in the same way I am. You are just not
Yes.
experiencing it in the same way I am. And that has been very helpful for me in regards to relationships.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, going back to what we talked about at the very beginning, that
Mhm.
everybody's lived experience is going to be very different than yours, even if you're experiencing the exact same thing. Astrology can tell you exactly why that is.
Mhm.
And I love that for it's not just giving permission to myself, but also giving more permission to the people around me. Like knowing that my partner is a Sagittarius moon in the sixth house conjunct Neptune, I'm like, there is so much information right there that just makes me understand why and how he operates and how it is so different from how I operate sometimes. So that rather than feeling like, we're in conflict all the time, I can say, okay, I see you. I know why you want to do this. I know why you want to operate this way. Let me tell you why that is at odds with me and how we can find common ground in
Mhm.
this particular scenario, how we both can nurture ourselves and take care of ourselves in this scenario. So it for me it also feels like it's this huge language bank and that I can reference to be able to to draw upon to be able to have conversations with people when I'm like, this is a conflict, or this is where we definitely see eye to eye, or let me explain why I'm coming at this way, blah, 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 blah. I think that it just offers us a different context for that as well. But I also hear you in terms of absorbing all the information. I can't tell you how many times I'm an eighth house sun. I can't tell you how many times I'm like, what is the eighth house sun again? Like, it's just
Yeah.
something that I feel like I have to learn over and over and over and over again. And that at a certain point, I'll turn on another podcast and be like, I already know all this. Like, why am I listening to this again?
Oh, I have that experience so often. That's so funny. But it sounds like you found a lot of these modalities that have been very healing for you at this turning point in your life. I'm curious, maybe with astrology specifically, was there a certain part of your chart or something you learned about yourself that helped that healing process that has helped you build a strong foundation for yourself when moving through hard times?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I can reference for certain parts of my life. What I would say is when I started really teaching yoga, or when I did my teacher training, I was 24. And looking back at that year in my life, I am a Sag rising. And so I'm ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter was transiting Cancer, and Cancer is where my sun is, and it's my eighth house. And so looking back, I found, and the eighth house can very much be connected to the cycles of life and death, or the process of giving and exchanging resources, or even giving and receiving energy. And also anything that is related or tied to those things. So it's sometimes affiliated with psychology or psychological therapies, and any sort of really deep healing that comes from loss and creation and giving and receiving, et cetera, et cetera. Which I know sounds really kind of murky, but really that's what I think of when the eighth house. It's hard to see from the ascendant line. So it's one of those houses that's also considered to be like, you can't see it directly because you can't look at it directly from your vantage point. But anyway, so with my ruling planet transiting my eighth house where my sun is, I found the healing modality. I found yoga, and I found teaching yoga as the way for me to start to make sense of all of these other things that I didn't know how to make sense of from my childhood and from my adolescence. And it was this, like I tell people all the time, that my particular teacher training felt like it broke me down and it rebuilt me, like it reconstructed me. And which I know a lot of people have that experience with their training. I feel like it just found me exactly when I needed it. And I found a community and a group of people that I needed exactly when I needed it. And I can 100% attribute that to my ruling planet transiting over my sun, my point of consciousness, my point of purpose at that particular juncture in my life. And I can also point to my Saturn return and just like the all of the astrology that was happening at that time, which would probably take me a little bit more time to explain, which I'm happy to do, but it wasn't just one thing. Like Jupiter transiting, my ruling planet transiting the eighth is easy to say. The Saturn return, especially for really any millennial born in like 88, 89, it was a gnarly moment.
Well, I'm about to start my Saturn return, so I'm mentally preparing.
Exciting. Okay, so Saturn in Aries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It's different for everybody. It really is. And it really depends on obviously any sort of aspects that other planets are making to your Saturn, but it also has a lot to do with where Saturn is placed in your chart as well, to know what themes are going to be coming up for you. During my Saturn return, there were also South Node eclipses happening in Capricorn, where my Saturn is, and Pluto was transiting Capricorn. So again, there was a lot of emphasis on Capricorn in particular and reconstructing any beliefs or any understanding of what that Capricorn energy, wherever that lives in your chart, there was a lot of reorganizing all of that information. And again, there's a particular sub generation in millennials that all have Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all in Capricorn, which is why I say, like, if you were born during those particular years, like 88, 89, and even a little bit of 90, guaranteed you felt it. Like, guaranteed you felt the eclipses and Pluto and your Saturn return. But for you, Saturn and Aries, I mean, I really just have to look at your chart, which I have to do soon, to know exactly where you'll be feeling this more than anything.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of us are in a very pivotal turning point, new chapter time of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Notice this collectively, but also just everyone I talk to personally.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that for you? And if so, how would you describe or name this current chapter that you feel like you are in or entering?
I love that you asked this question because I'm going to do a shameless plug and also say that I'm creating a free workbook for people called Identity Evolution that has to do exactly with this pivot that so many people are experiencing, which I would attribute to Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries.
Mm.
Saturn for the next 3 years, approximately, and Neptune for the next 14 years, approximately. Just because Aries is the sign that is connected to the phrase I am, and not I believe, not I feel, but I am. I exhibit this, I embody this. And so I think we're all kind of dreaming up a new dream for who it is we believe ourselves to be and who we want to exhibit in our lives, how we want to demonstrate and embody the person that we most want to be. So for me in particular, I've been making my way through this workbook myself to make sure I really like how it flows, but I've been considering how making, like exactly what I shared before, how making beautiful things is really, really important to me, how artistry is really important to me. And even if it's not necessarily productive or practical, or I guess I would say practical, not necessarily productive, but if it's not necessarily, even if it's not necessarily practical, making art in whatever, however I want to interpret that word, has to be a part of my next chapter. And I've been feeling that more with literally painting and drawing and putting color on paper and on canvas. But I think also I'm bringing a new level of artistry to everything that I do, to the home that I'm building with my partner, to the work that I'm doing with my clients. And when I personally think of artistry, I think of it being infused with what we were talking about earlier, more intention, but also with a lot of joy. Because at least for me, I want to create things that make me feel joyful. I want to look at things that I've made and feel inspired and excited by what I've created. And so there's a part of me that feels like I want to infuse that in every single thing that I do. I don't want to create something just to create it. I don't want it to just be like, I threw the information on the page and, the hierarchy is there and it's organizationally sound. Like, I want it to be a reflection of what makes me feel happy. And that means I can color outside the lines however much I want to, metaphorically and literally. So I don't necessarily know the specific answer to your question, but I know that that has to very much be a part of that. And what I think goes with that is also very strongly paying attention to any intuitive pulls that I feel very lucky that I own my own business, that I get to create my own schedule, that I get to be in charge of my time. And so with that freedom, I want to really allow myself to be free with it, and to not feel like I'm beholden to any rigid thing that's forcing me to do anything outside of what feels right for me. I'm
Yeah.
curious to know what your answer is to that question.
Oh my goodness. Well, that would honestly be a whole podcast. I definitely am starting a completely new chapter of my life. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm putting down roots here. I'm opening a physical space, and this will come out after I've announced that. I soft announced down the podcast, but nowhere else so far. Yeah, I'm truly, I don't want to make it all about me, so I won't go into it too much, but I am definitely entering a whole new chapter. I don't know what I would call it, but I feel like every step I've taken has been preparing me for this.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to hear. I mean, I'm excited to see more of how you share this new chapter of your life for sure. And I'm excited about the space. I'm excited about all of it.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm excited to see how you embrace and embody this new chapter of your life. And I'm curious if anything comes up for you around what you're definitely not bringing into this new chapter, what you feel like
Mm.
you need to release or what you already have let go of.
So, if there's anything that I can intentionally let go of, it's funny because I just went through like so many things in my head.
Hmm.
So going back to Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, I think for a lot of people where these planets are moving out of, I think for a lot of people, it felt like a lot of heaviness and it felt like a lot of sluggishness and like wading through the mud and just feeling like defeated in different aspects of life. And I know I have felt that over the last few years, at least while Saturn has been in Pisces in different ways. And about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I really got serious about wondering if I struggled with chronic depression. And I did a lot of research about whether or not I would self diagnose myself as having chronic depression. I know that it's something that I've experienced situationally over the course of my life, but I think timing wise, it lined up with these transits perfectly because there were a lot of moments where I was feeling really, really heavy and just wondering like, is this something that I actually need to get support with, not just with therapy, but also potentially with medication. And since then, since doing that kind of deep dive into trying to understand what chronic depression actually looks like and what it means, and reading like several different people's lived experiences of chronic depression and trying to contextualize it with myself, it's almost like I'm not going to say that it's not something that I'll ever not experience again because situational depression is very real and life is life and it will continue lifing. But at least for now, I feel like I've found a lot of tools through that investigatory process for myself that help me to pull myself out when I feel like I'm going in that direction. Whereas in the past, I would have just, in many instances, just kind of allowed myself to go there and to just lean into the heaviness and to lean into like the weight of my emotional experience and kind of collapse in on myself. And that is something that I very intentionally want to work away from as best I can in this next chapter. I think that situational depression, like I said, it's very real. And I think it can actually be very productive when you find your way out of it with whatever tools and support that you need to find your way out of it, at least in my experience. But for me, it just feels like it also still is, it feels like it's destructive. It's easy to want to choose self-destructive things when I'm there. And I just don't want to I intentionally don't want to bring that in to where
Mm.
I'm going.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love that intention. I love this new energy for this chapter for you. And I think that speaks so much to the importance of being present with ourselves and being able to sit with ourselves, get curious about what we're experiencing, and to stay with ourselves through it, and not jumping to what someone else might diagnose us with or avoiding or detaching, to really get to know ourselves and to sit in that discomfort and to be open to ways to navigate and process what we're moving through.
Yeah, yes. And I think me going through it myself is not something that it's something that I felt safe enough to do with myself because of work that I've done with therapists in the past, of all of the ways that I know that I've been able to show up for myself and hold space for myself in the past. But I also feel like, especially if depression is something that you're really struggling with, outside support is very necessary. Because again, it's like a collapsing in on yourself. That's how I always think of it. And having some kind of outside support to kind of pull you out of that collapse, even if it's just a little bit, can make all the difference. So I think it's also very situational in terms of how much we can rely on ourselves and rely on our own bodies and our own minds to be the sources of information, and when also we do need to seek outside support. It's kind of a specific balance. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I am all
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
therapy. I'm all for outside support. I mean,
Yeah.
that saved me. And I think part of being with yourself is knowing when you need that outside support and also knowing when you can't be with yourself and you just need someone to take the reins.
Hmm.
And there's a place for all of it.
Hmm.
So
I was just taking a deep breath after that.
yeah, yeah. I'm just curious personally, does it feel because you touched on this point earlier, and it's something I've experienced as well when we were talking about active listening, how you can sometimes hold yourself back from sharing more inner raw layers of yourself and show up more for others and hold that space for
Hmm.
others. So does opening yourself up more and sharing more of yourself, does that still feel kind of sticky and uncomfortable for you?
It does, but there's a few different reasons why. Because I like to consider myself very much an open book. And if I'm asked specifically about things, like if you were like, no, let's actually talk about your teenage trauma, I'd be like, okay, we'll talk about it. But, but also, when I do go into my experiences, everything becomes very surface level. And I do get emotional when I'm describing things. And I'm a Cancer eighth house sun. Like I will feel things in the moment. And I have found that when I do become that emotional talking about my experiences, it's just not always received. And so I'm very specific about when and how I share my experiences, and also when and how, or when and why I let myself cry in front of people, because inevitably I will end up crying. Like that's just me. Like I
Mm-hmm.
have friends in my life and my partner joke that I cry at literally everything. And people have different responses when they see someone crying. And so there's a part of me that's like, I will go there if you want me to go there, and I will feel it really deeply for the moment. But again, as a Cancer sun, it's for that moment. I will move on. And I want to be seen and heard in that moment when I'm expressing my stories and my stuff. But at the same time, we don't have to linger there. And I don't have to have somebody else necessarily hold space for me as I'm clearly having an emotional response, if that makes sense. So it's vulnerability that I'm willing to offer. But at the same time, I'm very specific about how I offer it and when I offer it. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense because I honestly really, really relate because I also feel very open in a lot of ways and I'm very discerning and intentional with when I share certain things because I don't want to be misunderstood. To put it shortly, I don't want to be misunderstood. I want people to project certain things onto me. And we're both five lines in human design. I don't know if that means anything to you. It just means that people really can project things and
Mm,
put their own experiences onto us or make assumptions.
hmm.
And I've been very aware of that in my life. And I also can sometimes cry easily when I'm talking about certain things. And isn't it so interesting how our society immediately thinks that if we're crying, there's something that needs to be fixed or something that
Yeah.
they need to do in that moment, or it's something that we haven't processed, or I don't know. I feel like we have to normalize tears more.
100%. I actually, so for years I taught hot yoga, and
Mm.
that's what I usually practice is hot yoga. And I used to tell people all the time that my purpose in life was to make people either cry or sweat or get some sort of salt water out of their their body. As a Cancer sun, I actually love it when people cry. I just feel like there is something that is being worked through or that they're releasing that was needed. And so when my clients cry, I'm like, wonderful. I'm so glad that you're crying. I'm so glad that you felt safe enough to cry, one, and two, that you are letting go of something that you don't need to carry with you anymore. And there's actually more science coming out about the chemical response of our bodies, that we're actually releasing something when we are crying. And so it is really important that we do it. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't necessary. But yeah, there is this stigma attached to tears that it doesn't need to be there anymore. And hopefully, with more of these conversations about mental health coming more to the fore, hopefully there will be more space for tears and for not attaching our own labels onto what they mean when they come from other people. But
Mm.
fingers crossed for that one.
Yeah, and I feel the same. I love when people cry with me. And I think for me, it highlights the fact that there are so many layers to emotions. And we can't just say tears means you're sad and really going through something.
Hmm.
There's so much nuance to it. And
Hmm.
just like everyone's experience is so different, and everyone's definition of the word sad is so different. And to not make assumptions about what someone else's tears might mean.
Yes, exactly. And to also not assume their own relationship to their tears as
Mhm.
well. You know, they might be having tears for some reaction to something, and they're also probably having their own emotional experience to expressing those tears. It's layered. So rather than projecting onto that in any context, you can just allow them to be where they are.
Exactly. Okay, so living intuitively wild means living dedicated to your true, authentic self, no matter what. How do you feel like you live intuitively wild?
Oh my God, where do I start? I mean, I think that it just comes back to listening to my body at the end of the day, at the end of every day, at the beginning of every day, during the day. I think that for me, I know it's not this way for everybody, but for me, my body has been my guiding compass to understanding and knowing where to go, what to say yes to, what to say no to. And that is not always in the confines of what's expected or what people want from me or what society deems is right or wrong. And when I think of what wild is, I think that it's like challenging the ways in which culture and people try to domesticate us. And so I think if I'm constantly going back to what my body wants and not what is projected onto me based off of what other people want, you know, sometimes it's in alignment, sometimes it's not, then I think that that's me being able to live intuitively and wildly every day.
I love that so much. And I feel like there's a lot that you spoke to around questioning other people's rules and really allowing yourself to do what you want to do instead.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. Which I want more and more and more people to do. I mean, question authority, question the information, question where it's coming from, question me, like question it all and make
Hmm.
sure it really resonates with you because at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Hollis, please share with everyone where they can connect with you, find you, all of the things.
Yeah, yeah. So you can visit my website, hollismm.com, for all things graphic design related, life design related, astrology related. I am on Substack at The Designed Life. I have my own podcast, The Designed Life, but I'm on Instagram for another month at hollis.mm and
Mhm.
threads under the same name. And yeah, that's where you can find me and all the things. Thank you
We
so much,
didn't
Rachel.
we didn't even get into the Instagram transition that you're
Yeah, I'm so conflicted right now.
Mhm.
I'm now like, should I backtrack on this? But I'm sticking to it, even if it's just a temporary pause. I'm gonna do it and just see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, I'm having a moment right now where I'm like happier on Instagram than I have been in years, and I'm like, do I really want to give this up? Damn it, Zuckerberg. But
Well,
yeah.
I feel like that happens often when we are giving something up that isn't 100% like fully bad. I mean, and what
Mhm.
is 100% fully bad? I think it's normal to then start to question things or to tempt us. And it's kind of like when we're leaving something behind that and we're sad that we're leaving it behind, we're grieving it. That's a positive thing because it means that it wasn't all bad and we learned a lot from it and there was a lot to take from it. And again, you can always come back and it's not as serious as some other experiences like that can be, but it is interesting to me that you're having that relationship with it right now.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll see where it goes. Nothing, I never think anything is permanent, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we will all stay curious about it. Okay. Thank you so much, Hollis.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.